I never thought something like this could happen in our quiet, suburban neighborhood. The kind of place where kids ride their bikes on freshly paved sidewalks, neighbors greet each other with a nod or a wave, and everything feels safe enough to let your guard down. I'm a district attorney, so I know a thing or two about crime and justice, but nothing prepared me for the nightmare that hit my family when my 5-year-old daughter was attacked by the woman everyone knew simply as Karen from the HOA. Karen was the kind of person who thrived on control, someone who took the rules way too seriously and never hesitated to make her displeasure known. She wasn't just a difficult neighbor, she was a force of intimidation who had everyone walking on eggshells. My daughter, Lily, was a bright, sweet little girl with a laugh that could light up any room. She was the center of my world and the reason I worked so hard every day. Our neighborhood was supposed to be a safe haven for her, a place where she could grow up without fear. But that illusion shattered one afternoon when Karen crossed a line that should never have been crossed. What happened to Lily was more than an accident or a moment of lost temper. It was a violent attack that left her fighting for her life in a hospital bed, slipping in and out of consciousness, while my heart broke with every beep of the machines around her. I'm used to dealing with tough cases and ruthless criminals, but this was different. This wasn't just about law and order anymore. It was personal. The woman who did this wasn't a stranger. She lived down the street, part of the same community that was supposed to protect my family, and I couldn't just stand by and let her get away with it. As a district attorney, I had the tools and connections that others didn't, and I was determined to use every one of them to make sure Karen faced the consequences. This is the story of how the attack on my daughter upended my life, and how I used the power at my disposal to make sure justice was served, no matter what it took. Karen had always been the thorn in our side, though I never imagined she was capable of something this cruel. She was the kind of woman who made a point of reminding everyone that she was in charge of the homeowners association, and she wielded that power like a weapon. The neighborhood meetings were never without tension when she was around. She had a sharp tongue and an unforgiving attitude, and she seemed to enjoy stirring up trouble just for the sake of it. Most of the neighbors tried to keep their distance, but Karen had it out for my family from the moment we moved in. I chalked it up to jealousy or maybe resentment, but I never thought she would cross a line this dark. It started with small things, petty complaints about our lawn, the color of our curtains, or the toys left in the yard. Karen would show up at our door with a scowl, reminding us of the HOA rules as if we were criminals. At first, I tried to keep things civil. I reasoned with her, hoping to calm her down, but it only made her more aggressive. The tension built quietly beneath the surface, but I was focused on my job and my daughter's well-being. I didn't see the storm brewing until that day. It was a warm afternoon when Lily was playing in the front yard. She was outside with her little red ball, chasing after it with the kind of innocent joy that only a child can have. I was inside, finishing some paperwork, keeping an eye on her through the window. Suddenly, I heard shouting from outside. I rushed to the door and saw Karen standing near Lily, her face twisted in anger. The scene was surreal. Karen was yelling at my daughter over something trivial. Lily had apparently wandered onto a patch of grass Karen had claimed was off-limits. I could hear Karen's voice getting louder and more hostile, but I didn't expect what happened next. Karen's anger boiled over, and before I could intervene, she grabbed Lily by the arm. The force of it made my heart stop. I shouted for her to let go, but Karen ignored me. Instead, she shook Lily hard and pushed her roughly against the fence. My daughter's cries filled the air, desperate and terrified. I ran out, trying to pull Karen away, but she was relentless. It was as if all the bitterness and control she had built up inside exploded in that moment. Her hands were unforgiving. Lily tried to shield herself, but the damage was done. The blows left bruises and cuts on her tiny body, and the pain in her eyes was something I will never forget. Neighbors started to gather, watching in shock and horror. Some tried to step in, but Karen's aggression was terrifying. The paramedics were called immediately, and I followed the ambulance in my car, my mind racing with fear. At the hospital, the doctors told me the worst. They weren't sure if Lily would wake up from the coma. Every minute felt like an eternity. I sat by her bedside, holding her hand, whispering words of comfort that I wasn't sure she could hear. The helplessness was unbearable. That night, as I sat alone in the sterile hospital room, rage and sorrow collided inside me. Karen's actions had shattered our lives in an instant. My daughter, who had been so full of life and laughter, was now trapped in a silent battle between consciousness and oblivion. I couldn't understand how someone could harm a child with such cruelty, especially over something so meaningless. This was no longer just a neighborhood dispute. It was a crime, a betrayal of the trust we all place in our community. The police arrived the next day to take statements, but I could already tell the wheels of justice would turn slowly. Karen had her allies and knew how to manipulate the system. I was determined not to let her slip through the cracks. My mind was already planning the steps I would take to ensure she faced the full consequences of her actions. Lily's fight for life had become my fight for justice. What happened that day would change everything, and I was ready to use everything I had to make sure Karen would never harm anyone again. The morning after Lily was admitted to the hospital, my world felt like it was crumbling. I was still holding on to a thread of hope, but that hope was fragile. As district attorney, I understood how the wheels of justice moved, but even with my experience, this felt like a nightmare I was unprepared for. I wanted the people responsible held accountable immediately, but reality was harsher than I expected. The HOA board convened quickly after the incident, but instead of showing concern or outrage, they treated the situation like a minor dispute blown out of proportion. Karen had long been a member in good standing, and many on the board were reluctant to condemn her outright. They talked in circles, focusing on procedure and bylaws rather than the harm that had been done. It was infuriating to watch them minimize what happened to my daughter. They spoke of mediation and warnings as if a child beaten into a coma was just a neighborhood disagreement waiting to be smoothed over. Their indifference stung as much as the attack itself. When the police arrived to take statements, I hoped for swift action, but it quickly became clear that they were hesitant. Karen was a long-time resident with no prior criminal record, and some officers seemed reluctant to treat the situation with the severity it deserved. I gave my statement with every detail I could remember, but the response was measured and cautious. They said they needed more evidence before making an arrest. I understood their position professionally, but it was maddening to see the system slow to act while my daughter lay in a hospital bed, her life hanging by a thread. I watched Karen continue to deny everything with a calm that made my blood boil. She presented herself as the victim, claiming that Lily had been careless or had provoked her in some way. It was the same old tactic of shifting blame, but this time it was personal. She even managed to rally a few neighbors to her side, spreading whispers that my family was overreacting, that the whole thing was exaggerated. The injustice of it all was suffocating. At home, I was torn between my role as a father and my role as a prosecutor. Every instinct told me to act quickly and decisively, but my knowledge of the legal process warned me to be patient and methodical. Still, patience was a luxury I didn't feel I had. Watching Lily fight for her life, knowing the person responsible was out there walking free, fueled a burning anger inside me. I couldn't rely on the HOA or the police to protect my family or bring justice in the way I knew was necessary. I reached out to a few trusted colleagues within the district attorney's office. They understood the stakes, and their support was a small comfort in the chaos. Together, we started gathering everything we could: medical reports, eyewitness accounts, photographs of Lily's injuries, and records of Karen's history with the HOA. I wasn't going to let this case be swept under the rug. The legal system could be slow and frustrating, especially when dealing with someone who knew how to navigate it for her own benefit. I was determined not to let that happen here. I had the connections, the resources, and the experience to push harder than anyone else. This wasn't just about prosecuting a criminal. It was about sending a message that no one was above the law, not even a powerful HOA member with a history of intimidation. My daughter's condition remained critical, and with every passing day, my resolve only grew stronger. I would use every tool at my disposal to make sure Karen paid for what she did. This was no longer just a legal battle. It was a war for justice and for the safety of my family. I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was ready to walk it, no matter the cost. After the initial shock of the attack and the frustration with the slow pace of the system, I realized that relying on the usual channels wouldn't be enough. Karen was a cunning adversary who had spent years weaving herself into the fabric of our community and manipulating the HOA's influence. She had become almost untouchable, shielded by neighbors who feared her, and a legal system reluctant to move quickly against someone so well connected. I knew then that if I wanted justice for Lily, I would have to take matters into my own hands. I had to use everything I had as a district attorney, every connection, every resource, to build a case so strong that Karen would have no way out. I started by reaching out to a few trusted colleagues in the DA's office. People I knew were discreet and fiercely committed to justice. I didn't share every detail at first, but I explained the situation carefully, emphasizing the urgency and severity. They understood immediately. There was no room for mistakes, no room for bureaucracy to get in the way of protecting a child and punishing a dangerous criminal. We formed an informal team, a small but determined group who would work quietly behind the scenes to gather evidence and plan our approach. Our first step was to gather every piece of evidence we could find. I had the hospital reports that detailed Lily's injuries, but medical records alone wouldn't be enough. I needed eyewitnesses, neighbors who had seen the attack or heard the shouting. I knew some were afraid of Karen, but fear was not going to protect anyone anymore. I sent trusted investigators to talk to people discreetly, ensuring they understood the importance of speaking up. Slowly, we pieced together statements that confirmed the severity of the attack and Karen's aggression. I also requested surveillance footage from nearby homes and any community cameras that might have captured the incident. It wasn't easy. Some residents were hesitant to cooperate, worried about stirring up trouble, but my colleagues and I made it clear that this was a matter of public safety and justice. Eventually, we obtained clips that showed Karen's movements that afternoon, her hostile behavior toward Lily, and the moments leading up to the attack. The footage was damning, and it gave us the hard proof we needed to push forward. While gathering evidence, I was also working behind the scenes to prepare the legal strategy. I consulted with senior prosecutors who had experience with assault cases, especially those involving vulnerable victims. We discussed the best charges to bring against Karen, weighing the possibility of aggravated assault and child abuse. We knew this case had to be airtight because Karen would surely fight back with everything she had. She had resources, influence, and the will to deny and delay. But I was determined to outmaneuver her at every turn. I also made contact with a few community leaders who had quietly expressed support for our family. Some neighbors were tired of living under Karen's reign of fear and control. Their backing was crucial, not just for testimony, but to help shift public opinion. I wanted this case to expose Karen's true nature, not just for our sake, but to protect anyone else she might try to hurt in the future. We began quietly organizing community support that would back the legal efforts without putting anyone in jeopardy. The most difficult part was balancing my personal feelings with my professional responsibilities. I was angry, of course, but I had to keep my emotions in check. I couldn't let my desire for revenge cloud my judgment or jeopardize the case. Every move had to be calculated and strategic. This wasn't about payback, it was about justice. I reminded myself that Lily deserved the truth and accountability, not a public spectacle fueled by rage. My colleagues helped keep me grounded, offering guidance and perspective when the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm me. At the same time, I made sure my family was supported. My spouse and I leaned on each other, sharing the burden of worry for Lily and the stress of the legal battle ahead. We were exhausted, but the determination to see this through gave us strength. I knew that my role as a father and as a DA were converging in this fight, and I was willing to go to any lengths to protect my daughter and ensure Karen would be held responsible. As the pieces came together, I felt a cautious hope. We had built a case that was strong, backed by evidence and testimony, and supported by a community ready to stand up for what was right. Karen's days of hiding behind her position were numbered. I was ready to take the next step, to bring the full weight of the law down on her. Lily's life had been forever changed by Karen's cruelty, and now it was my job to make sure Karen suffered the consequences. This was not just a battle for justice, but a fight to reclaim safety and peace for my family and our neighborhood. The day we formally filed charges against Karen was one of the most intense moments I had ever experienced. I was no stranger to courtrooms or high-stakes cases, but this one cut deeper than any I had prosecuted before. This was my daughter's safety and her future on the line. The paperwork was meticulous, every detail of the assault documented with the evidence we had painstakingly gathered. I wanted to make sure there was no room for doubt or dismissal. The charge was clear and severe: aggravated assault and child abuse. We were sending a message that this kind of violence would not be tolerated, no matter who you were or how much power you thought you had. From the moment the charges were filed, Karen's defense team sprang into action. They came with a fierce determination to discredit the evidence and twist the narrative. They painted her as a victim of overzealous accusations, claiming that she had been provoked or that the injuries were exaggerated. Their goal was to sow doubt, to weaken the case so that she could walk away unscathed. Watching their strategy unfold was infuriating, but I knew it was part of the process. This was the kind of opposition that would test every bit of my resolve and skill. Court hearings began almost immediately. The atmosphere in the courtroom was charged, with neighbors packed into the gallery, some quietly showing support, others whispering in disbelief. The media had caught wind of the case as well, turning what had started as a private family tragedy into a public spectacle. I was prepared for the scrutiny, but it was difficult to ignore the weight of every glance and every whispered question. The courtroom was no longer just a place for legal proceedings. It was a battleground for public opinion and a test of character for everyone involved. Karen appeared calm and composed, a stark contrast to the turmoil that I and my family were experiencing. She maintained an air of innocence, denying everything with a confidence that was unsettling. Her lawyers were skilled, attacking every witness and every piece of evidence with precision. They questioned neighbors about their statements, trying to expose inconsistencies. They challenged the authenticity of the surveillance footage. It was exhausting to watch, but I remained focused. I knew that truth and justice were on our side, and that was what mattered most. One of the most difficult moments came when I had to sit through the cross-examination of a close neighbor who had witnessed part of the attack. The defense tried to portray her as biased and unreliable, but she held firm, recounting the events with clarity and courage. It was a reminder that even in the face of intimidation, some people would stand up for what was right. Those moments gave me strength and renewed my determination to see this through. Behind the scenes, I worked closely with the prosecutors and investigators to anticipate every move Karen's defense might make. We prepared counter-arguments, gathered additional evidence, and lined up expert witnesses who could testify about the severity of Lily's injuries and the psychological impact of the assault. This was no ordinary case. It required every resource at our disposal. The pressure was immense, but so was my commitment. The community's response was mixed. Some rallied behind us, offering support and encouragement, while others still whispered doubts or sided with Karen. It was a reminder of how complicated justice can be, especially when it involves people you thought you knew. I spent countless hours trying to shield my family from the worst of the fallout, while also standing firm in the courtroom and the public eye. Every day brought new challenges, but I refused to let them break me. As the trial progressed, the stakes grew higher. The defense's tactics became more aggressive, but so did our resolve. We were not just fighting for a conviction. We were fighting to protect my daughter and send a clear message that no one could harm her or anyone else without consequences. Karen's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack, and I could see the fear behind her eyes. She knew this fight was far from over, and that the truth was catching up to her. In those long days of courtroom drama, I realized that justice was not just about laws and evidence. It was about courage, persistence, and the willingness to face difficult truths head-on. My role as a district attorney had never felt more personal, and I was determined to honor my daughter's strength by seeing this case through to the end. The battle had only just begun, but I was ready to fight with everything I had. The days and weeks after the attack were some of the hardest I have ever faced. Watching Lily lie in that hospital bed, barely conscious, was a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. Every beep of the machines, every shift of her fragile body was a reminder of how vulnerable she was and how suddenly our lives had been shattered. As a father, there was nothing more heartbreaking than feeling helpless while your child fights for her life. It was a struggle to keep my own emotions in check, especially in public, where I had to maintain a professional front for the sake of the case. At home, the atmosphere was heavy with worry and exhaustion. My spouse and I did our best to hold each other up, but there were moments when the weight of it all threatened to break us. Our other children tried to make sense of what was happening in their own way, sometimes asking questions that were impossible to answer. We leaned on each other, finding strength in our shared love for Lily and in the quiet moments where we could just be a family, even if the world outside felt chaotic and cruel. The support from friends and a few neighbors became a lifeline. Some people who had once kept their distance reached out with meals, kind words, and offers to help with errands. It reminded me that even in the darkest times, there were people who cared deeply and wanted to stand with us. Their kindness was a balm to my bruised spirit, giving me the strength to keep fighting in the courtroom and beyond. Yet, the community was divided. There were whispers and sideways glances, and some neighbors avoided us altogether. Karen still had her supporters, and their coldness was a sharp contrast to the warmth we found in our closest allies. It was a painful reminder that justice was not just a matter of law, but also of social dynamics and old loyalties. I had to accept that not everyone would stand with us, and that sometimes the hardest battles were fought outside the courtroom. Throughout it all, I found unexpected moments of clarity and resolve. Sitting by Lily's bedside, holding her small hand in mine, I promised myself that I would not let this tragedy define us. My daughter's spirit was stronger than her injuries, and that strength fueled my determination to see justice done. I knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I also knew we were not alone. The community's support, the love of my family, and the fire inside me combined to create a shield against despair. This was more than a legal fight. It was a fight to reclaim our lives and to protect the future for Lily and every other child in our neighborhood. In those quiet moments of fear and hope, I understood that while Karen's actions had changed everything, they would not break us. We would endure, we would heal, and we would fight for the justice my daughter deserved. The day the verdict was announced felt like a moment suspended in time. After months of grueling hearings, emotional testimony, and relentless legal battles, the courtroom was packed with neighbors, media, and everyone who had followed our story. I sat quietly, my heart pounding in my chest, holding my spouse's hand as we waited for the judge to deliver the decision. The weight of everything, the fear, the anger, the long nights by Lily's hospital bed all converged in that one moment. I knew this was more than just a legal ruling. It was the culmination of a fight for justice, for my daughter's dignity, and for the safety of our community. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear. She found Karen guilty on all counts. The words hit me like a wave, a mix of relief and validation washing over me. The evidence had been overwhelming. The testimony from witnesses, the medical reports detailing Lily's injuries, the surveillance footage all had painted a stark picture of a violent attack that no one could deny. Karen's defense had tried to twist the story, but the truth had prevailed. The sentencing was just as significant. Karen was ordered to serve a substantial prison term, far beyond what some might have expected for a first-time offender in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The judge emphasized the severity of the crime, particularly because it involved a child, and the need to send a strong message that such behavior would not be tolerated under any circumstances. The punishment reflected not only the physical harm she had inflicted on Lily, but also the emotional trauma and fear she had sown in our community. As the sentence was read, I watched Karen's face. The calm she had worn throughout the trial cracked, revealing the fear and desperation beneath. She realized that her actions had consequences far beyond her control, and the life she had built around her power and influence was unraveling. It was a moment of reckoning, one that I hoped would serve as a warning to anyone who thought they could hide behind their status or intimidate others without consequence. Leaving the courthouse, I felt a complex mix of emotions. The fight was over, but the scars remained. Lily was still in the hospital, her road to recovery long and uncertain. The legal victory was a crucial step, but it was only the beginning of healing for our family. I was proud of the justice we had achieved, but also painfully aware that no sentence could erase the trauma my daughter had endured. The community's reaction was immediate and varied. Many expressed relief and gratitude that the truth had been acknowledged and justice served. For those who had supported us from the beginning, it felt like a victory not just for our family but for the entire neighborhood. They saw it as a moment of accountability and a chance to reclaim a sense of safety that Karen's presence had threatened. However, there were still some who struggled to accept the outcome. A few neighbors remained silent or withdrew, unwilling to confront the reality of what had happened or the part Karen had played. It was a reminder that healing was a process that extended beyond the courtroom and into the hearts and minds of everyone affected. In the weeks that followed, I reflected deeply on what this case had taught me. Justice was not just about punishment, but about restoring balance and protecting the vulnerable. It required courage, persistence, and sometimes the willingness to stand alone. As a district attorney and a father, I had been pushed to my limits, but I had also seen the power of community and truth. My daughter's fight was far from over, but with Karen held accountable, I felt a renewed sense of hope. This verdict was a promise that we would not be silenced, that the voices of the innocent mattered, and that justice could prevail even against those who seemed untouchable. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time in a long time, I believed that healing and peace were possible. The days after the verdict brought a strange mix of relief and lingering pain. Lily remained in the hospital, her body fragile but slowly responding to treatment. Each small sign of progress—an eyelid fluttering, a faint smile felt like a victory in a battle that seemed endless. Our family learned to take things one moment at a time, finding strength in the little milestones that showed she was fighting to heal. The road ahead was uncertain, but we refused to lose hope. The neighborhood began to change as well. The fear that had hung over our community started to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of renewal. Some residents who had once been silent now spoke up, determined to create a safer, more supportive environment. The HOA underwent a shift, with new leadership committed to transparency and respect rather than intimidation. It wasn't perfect, and trust would take time to rebuild, but it was a start. For me, the experience was transformative. I had always believed in justice as a principle, but this case taught me how deeply personal it could become. It reinforced the importance of using every tool and connection available to protect those who cannot protect themselves. At the same time, it reminded me to balance the demands of the law with the needs of my family and my own well-being. Most importantly, Lily's spirit remained unbroken. Her resilience inspired all of us to keep moving forward, to believe that even after the darkest moments, healing was possible. We were not defined by the attack or the pain it caused, but by the love, determination, and hope that carried us through. As we faced the future, we did so together, stronger and more united than ever before.